Hi, I'm Wally Tallis. I'm a Torres Strait Islander from the Western Islands of St Paul's Moa. I also have connection to the Birigubba people of Juru, which is based in Townsville. So growing up all my life, I lived in Townsville, which is one of the capital cities in North Queensland. I come from a father who is my Indigenous heritage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, and my mother is of Scottish-Irish descent. So growing up all my life, it was quite unique in regards to living what we call a Western system or a non-Indigenous system, and growing up with my father's heritage. When I grew up, we actually had to live in Townsville in the Aboriginal community, so we weren't allowed to live anywhere else. We were told where we had to live. That was a community called Garbet. I also had a good childhood. I had the best of both worlds. So growing up, I remember being free. In Townsville, it was big backyards and being able to run around, plenty of fishing. Grew up with lots of community raising. So it's probably the difference in what I think is a unique ability of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as mainstream is that we're looked after by a community as opposed to a single parent. So all my life we'd go out and play, but you always got looked after by the people in your community. They'd take you in and give you a feed or tell you to get home, or they'd rouse on you if you got roused on. My father always taught me the only thing you've got is your family name, so don't ever disrespect it. And it's important that my children understand the role they play in the family. So we're one cog, it's not a domino effect, we are one circle and they're part of that family. And I think that's the difference between, traditionally the difference between Aboriginal and non-Indigenous families is that there is no hierarchical system. We actually do have a role in a circular motion, and the children play an important role in regards to that connection. My son is 12, my other son's 10 and my daughter's 9. So I'm just starting to teach them now certain things in their life where they have to learn about their Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. So I teach them what tribes we come from, what our language group is, what our totem is. So totems are, in Western language, you have star signs like Scorpio and all that. So we have a connection to an animal or a symbol. It's usually sky, sea and land. Never really experienced racism as a kid, which was good. I think I was sheltered from it from my mother and father. But growing up and getting older, when they started talking about some of their stories, it certainly was a bit intimidating in regards to some of the things they had to put up with and what they stopped us from getting exposed to. I'm one of 36 cousins, both from my Indigenous and non-Indigenous side of the family. I'm the only one in my family to finish year 12. Having a big family, I was the fourth youngest, so the ability to be pulled into line. But the great thing about that was because I had non-Indigenous and Indigenous family, it brought us so much closer together. They didn't see me as an Indigenous person or a black person, or as a white fellow. We were treated as a family member. Every afternoon, 19 of us would go to my grandparents' house and we'd have to do the chores around the house. The greatest memories of my life actually is growing up with my family. I was lucky enough to get a sporting scholarship. I was signed with the Brisbane Broncos for 4 years, and I played football most of my life. Unfortunately, I was involved in a car accident and had to start working for a living. So my current role is I'm the Executive Director for Aboriginal Affairs, so I actually lead the economic agenda for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people for the state. And all the evidence suggests, and I can live it myself, is that if you don't have an education above year 12, then you're less likely to succeed in regards to being access to employment and having a job in the future. I think the challenge for the education system, but, is how do they adapt Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander learning into schools? Naturally, as a culture for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we're visual learners. We're not textbook learners. So how do we mix that balance in regards to ensuring that not only do we have attracted Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to schools, but how do we teach them in the system which continues to enable them to grow and to learn at the same rate as non-Indigenous people? How do we have a system of Western education, which is important? We live in a Western society, but there needs to also be a key or just as important element to that is how our schools are actually adaptive to not only the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, but Australia's a multicultural society. So how do we are adaptive to the learning and cultural needs of everybody? I suppose what I think Aboriginal people can do is to get the end result, there's many ways to get there. There's not just one Western way. There's different ways which attract to people's culture where they get that buy-in. I think that's the importance, and that comes with the ability for the teachers to get to know who their students are, really understand the curriculum they're delivering, and how do they deliver a class or an environment which meets the needs of people. One of my passions is, particularly in schools with lots like Pullenvale, is that We have students who I believe will be our next doctors, lawyers, nurses, judges and policemen and policewomen. And I think that for them to have an understanding of the first Australians and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people now will break down those things which is still unsaid a lot in Australia. There still is racism in Australia. We see it many times on the sporting fields. You'll hear in the communities now we talk about reconciliation. So what does that mean? It means bridging the differences between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in regards to an understanding of what it was. So I think if we embed that in our students now who have an understanding that they aren't different, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, they're still my friends. They'll be your friends for life. When they grow to be adults and they start taking the workforce together, they won't see colour. They'll see that that's my friend. That's the ability for me to say, you know, John or Joe or Sue or Debbie, no, they're my friend. They've been my friend for a long time. I'd like to think that this school, through the future leaders, will stop racism. If they understand Aboriginal culture, aren't scared of it, really embrace it, then they won't see a difference. They won't see it as them. It'll be we.